Hormuz, what are going to be Iran's relations with Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis moving forward, and so forth and so on. There are just a number of complicated issues that will take time to figure out by themselves. And then to put all the pieces together will take even more time. So that's problem number one, a lot of complicated issues. The second is that the Israelis will go to great lengths to make sure we don't have a negotiated settlement. They've made it unequivocally clear they want to go back to bombing. They have enormous power with the United States, in large part because of the power of the lobby inside the United States. Third point is there's zero trust on the on the Iranian side. The Iranians just don't trust us at all. And that makes it very hard in a complicated situation like this to get some sort of agreement. And then the final point, and a point that's not to be underestimated, is that the Trump administration has demonstrated since it took office in January 2025 that when it comes to negotiating with adversaries and shutting wars down, it's the gang that can't shoot straight. I mean, just look at the Ukraine-Russia negotiations. They made a complete hash of those negotiations. Look at their efforts to end the genocide and create some sort of meaningful settlement in Gaza. They've made a hash of that as well. And with regard to Iran, there's hardly any reason to think that they're going to be successful there. They were negotiating with the Iranians last June, and before we could even come close to getting an agreement, the United States and Israel attacked Iran. So if you look at our track record, there's no reason for optimism here. So I'd say for these four different reasons, it's highly unlikely we'll get a negotiated settlement.
Now, just to kind of underscore your point, and I mean, that sounds to me like every one of those, any one of those is a poison pill altogether. It's you tell me if I'm wrong, but I read that is that they say there will be no negotiated settlement.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Danny. That's just an elaboration of some of the issues that are on the table, and there are others as well. But let me come at it from a slightly different angle. If you look at what the Iranians are trying to do and compare it to what we're trying to do, you see that at a very high level, we have fundamentally different approaches. What the Americans want to do is they want to open the straits and they want to negotiate a nuclear deal up front. All those other issues having to deal with who controls the strait, lifting of sanctions, reparations, and so forth and so on. We want to put that off. We want to get the nuclear deal settled. At the same time, we open the strait. The Iranians have exactly the opposite approach. They want to open the strait, but they want to settle all of those issues up front and then go to the nuclear issue. And from an American point of view, this does not make sense, because if you go down that road and you settle all the other issues before you settle the nuclear issue, we lose our leverage. This is why we want the nuclear issue first. We think we can settle the nuclear issue because the leverage we have comes with all those other issues that would then be outstanding. But again, the Iranians have a very different view. So at a macro level, the two sides are approaching these negotiations in fundamentally different ways. And that just compounds the problem associated with trying to reach an agreement.
Okay, so I think it's pretty reasonable to say that at least for the foreseeable future, there's not going to be a negotiated settlement in which both sides agree to any unified terms that ends the war. So then that leaves the other two options are either the walkaway theory, where President Trump just decides and claims victory and then leaves, picks up our toys, opens the blockade and leaves, and just hope that Iran then follows suit and opens up theirs, and then the return to war. I'm going to get that last one separately. What are the chances, do you think, that given all of the options here, the President Trump does some version of the declare victory and walk away theory?
I think the chances are about zero. First of all, the national security establishment in the United States is addicted to war. It's deeply committed to policing every inch of the planet. And the idea that we would walk away from the Middle East from the point of view of the American national security establishment is unthinkable. And then on top of that, you have Israel and the Israel lobby. They're not going to let us walk away. One of the principal reasons we're up to our eyeballs in alligators in the Middle East is because of Israel and because of the power of the lobby inside the United States. There's nothing happening that's going to change that. So we're not going away. We're going to be stuck there forever.
Well, then that seems to leave one other option, unless you see a different one, and that is to, and certainly there's many advocates, very powerfully so, in President Trump's inner circle as well as in the public sphere, of returning to combat operations to finish them off once and for all. I keep hearing that phrase being used by a lot of them. Two questions of you there. Number one, just your possibility or your thoughts on the efficacy of that. And second, is there another alternative besides those three I've enumerated?
I do think there's another alternative, which I'll say a word about in a minute. But I think the chances of us returning to war are small, and in large part because we can't win. I mean, we couldn't win in the initial bombing campaign. And it's not like we now have some magic weapons or some additional forces that are going to allow us to win now. I don't see how starting the war back up, starting the air war back up solves our problem. As we've talked about on the show on numerous occasions, not only do we not bring the Iranians to their knees, but furthermore, they have the ability to retaliate against us, and they can retaliate in ways that will greatly damage the international economy. So starting the war over again just doesn't make sense. I think what's likely to happen is that you may get some sort of agreement on opening the straits or some sort of agreement on a few issues temporarily. But what will really matter here is the state of the international economy. I've long believed that what happens in terms of the international economy will be the decisive factor that will bring President Trump to the negotiating table and force him to make a deal that recognizes the fact that Iran won this war. The United States cannot tolerate this situation going on because it'll just do so much damage to the international economy. And that, of course, includes the American economy. So at some point, I think that President Trump will be forced to cut a deal, and that deal will reflect the fact that we have lost this war, which we have.
But wouldn't there's the same headwinds against the declare victory and walk away? Wouldn't those same forces be against any kind of a deal like that he would agree to?
No, not that one, not that set of concerns. The headwinds would come from the fact that you're dealing with a lot of complicated issues that have to be resolved. And that means it would just take time to put an agreement together. But I believe that the speed of the agreement would be reasonably fast, in large part because we would have such an incentive to shut this one down. I mean, the question you have to ask yourself, Danny, is can we allow this war to go on and on and on from an economic perspective, given what it's doing to the international economy? And, every week the situation gets worse and worse. And at some point, I think it has to be shut down. And I think that we will go to great lengths to shut it down at some point down the road. If not, you'll just have another frozen conflict that looks a lot like Ukraine.
And by the time President Trump gets back from China, we'll talk about his visit there in just a minute, but there's going to be a lot of pressure for him to do something because of the issue that you talk about the economy and about the price of oil, the price of gas, fertilizers, helium, aluminum, all those kinds of things that are still in insufficient supplies coming out of the Gulf. How long can he allow the situation, or better question is, how long can President Trump resist the pressure before it gets so great that compels him into making a decision like that? Meaning, how long could this go on at the current stalemate situation?
It's very hard to say. I mean, I don't even think the best economists can predict how long this can go on. It's very hard to say exactly what's going to happen with the international economy, and that matters a great deal for figuring out what the timeline looks like. But I think it's quite clear that if this were to go on into the fall, the consequences for the world economy would be disastrous. You can already see what's happening to inflation in the United States. And I believe this is just beginning. I think that, all of the problems that we now see are going to be compounded over time. And we're going to be in much worse shape at the end of the summer than we are today. So at some point, President Trump is going to have to do something about this. And what exactly he does remains to be seen.
And if we think that President Trump is not immune to economic pressure and some version of logic, wouldn't it seem reasonable that therefore the absolute best case scenario for the United States would be, let's get out of here now, because those things you talk about, these economic pressures and stuff, are almost baked in. They must build up to that the longer this thing stays closed. So therefore, it's in our incentive to do whatever is necessary as quickly as possible to mitigate against the compounding problems that are already adding up. And yet it doesn't seem that we're willing to. So it seems to me, and I'm just asking you this question, if we're not willing to make the same decision now, why would we make the same decision later on?
Because the pain will be much greater then. The fact is that the pain has not been that great yet. The pain has been not sufficient to coerce President Trump into cutting a deal. He can continue to pretend that we haven't lost the war. And he can talk about, all the leverage we have and how we're going to pull our chestnuts out of the fire. He can do that now. But as time goes by, it becomes more and more difficult to do that. You saw this with, I think, the Robert Kagan essay in the Atlantic Monthly, magazine is a bellwether here. Kagan, who is a card-carrying neoconservative and a big proponent of big stick diplomacy, fully recognizes that we have lost the Iran war, that it's a catastrophic defeat, and it's going to have hugely negative consequences for us moving forward. With the passage of time, more and more people will recognize that, and the pain that we will suffer and other people around the world will suffer, including our allies in Europe, will be very great. And that will put enormous pressure on President Trump to cut some sort of deal. Exactly what the deal looks like is hard to say. And as we were talking about before, given the fact that there are a lot of moving parts in any deal, it may take some time to put the pieces together. But the fact is the incentives to put those pieces together quickly will be very great because of all the leverage that the Iranians have.
Well, and that's the exact question I was going to ask. I mean, given these, given these conditions that they say the Iranians are required to even start negotiations, implies that they are very well aware of all these pressures you're talking about, and therefore don't want to give in on anything. So then one would reasonably ask, I mean, I know I'm asking you to speculate here, but what even might an agreement that we could agree to that would be acceptable to Iran to get our chestnuts out of the fire later on under pain look like?
I don't know. There's so many moving parts here. For example, if the Iranians were able to get all the sanctions lifted and were to get reparations and control of the Strait of Hormuz, they might be willing to cut a deal on the nuclear issue that's very attractive to President Trump and to the Israelis. But if we are unwilling to give them much sanctions relief and we're willing to pay no reparations, they may think about the nuclear issue in different ways. And with regard to reparations, one could argue that there are trade-offs between that dimension of any deal and the whole question of a toll booth in the Strait. Because if you don't get reparations, and let's say you don't get much sanctions relief either, then the toll booth takes on greater importance. Or it may be the case that if you lifted all sanctions and paid reparations, they would be willing to give up on the toll booth. In other words, what you see here is that you just have a lot of different elements in a future deal that have to be settled on their own. And then, moreover, how they all fit together matters greatly. And, we could speculate from now to kingdom come on different ways to put a deal together. But what it actually looks like is impossible to say.
And the one thing that is pretty clear to say, though, is that it's going to be ugly from our perspective. There won't be a good outcome. There'll only be what we can